Hello everyone, I'm Shanti representing the Boys and Girls Club. And today I will be covering Smart Moves program. Today we will discuss the topic of thinking before you act. In this presentation, we will discuss first, different ways to protect yourself during this pandemic time dealing with the COVID-19 virus. I will discuss different safety tips and different ways you can protect yourself. Followed by an icebreaker that will introduce us into the topic of thinking before you act. Next, we will discuss thinking logically and the use of common sense. This pandemic that we are currently dealing with, called COVID-19, also known as coronavirus, is something that has affected us all. So here are a few tips that you could follow to help prevent yourself from contracting it. 1. Start by washing your hands more frequently. And when you do, wash your hands for about 20 seconds with warm water and soap. 2. Avoid touching your face. Some say that the virus can live up to 72 hours on some surfaces such as metal. 3. Stop shaking hands and hugging others, at least just for now. It's best to try to stay at least 6 feet apart from another person. 4. Don't share personal items, such as your cell phone, makeup, and/or a comb or hairbrush. 5. Cover your mouth and nose when you sneeze and/or cough. When you do that, try to use your forearm and try to cough and sneeze within your inner elbow. And 6, try to clean and disinfect all surfaces as frequently as possible. And there are more safety tips that you can follow. And if you're interested, take a look and visit at healthline.com. Okay, so here's an icebreaker. If everyone jumped off a bridge and they told you it was fun, would you do it too? Now, before we go any further, let's start by defining what it means to think before you act. Thinking before you act is a basic brain processing that, when it's typically used, it refers to how you should think about all the possible outcomes of a situation and make the best choice about what you are about to do. When one thinks before he or she acts, they must always think with the end in mind, meaning that you always want to think of what could happen in the end of the situation before you get involved in it. For example, if you are afraid of heights, most people that are afraid of heights will think twice before they climb to the top of that mountain, because they know at the end they're going to be at a very high height that will not make them comfortable. Another more serious example could be the use of a gun. Everyone knows that if you are to use a gun, the common end result is going to be someone getting hurt or possibly being killed. It is always best to think before you act. When I say this, it is always best to make sure you think logically, to use common sense, and to remember that everyone deals with these type of issues. So let's go into further details on each topic. First, let's start by defining thinking logically. First, let's let everyone take a moment to think about what that could mean. Now, the proper definition of thinking logically is a process in which one uses reasoning consistently to come up with a conclusion. So simply put, you should think before you act on your final decision. For example, say your mom is in the kitchen and she's cooking. She reaches into the stove and grabs the hot pan and she burns her hand. You see this and you notice that, man, that looked like it really hurt. The next day, your mom asks you, hey, reach inside the oven and grab that pan for me. At this point, this is when thinking logically should come into play, because you remember what happened to mom yesterday. When she reached inside the oven and she tried to grab the pan with her bare hands, she burned herself. So, what do you think your choice is? What do you think you should do? Should you A, use your bare hand to grab it, or should you B, grab an oven mitt to protect your hand from getting burned like mom's did? The logical answer is that you should grab the oven mitt, place it on your hand, and then reach inside the oven to grab the hot pan. Now, let's discuss common sense. Lastly, I will discuss the gender challenges associated with thinking logically and the use of common sense. So let's get started. Now let's let everyone take a moment to think about what common sense is. By definition, common sense is the use of good sense and sound judgment in a particular matter. To explain it, a lot of people make jokes about people not having common sense, but there are those who do forget to use common sense at times. For example, if there is a stove fire, do you A, throw water on the flame, B, run away from the flames, or C, throw salt on the flames? The correct answer is C. If there is a stove fire, you always want to try to throw some salt on it and or try to smother the flames before it gets too big. Now, don't get me wrong. There may be people out there who may not know that water on a stove fire only makes things worse. But that's when you have to think logically. Another example of the good use of common sense is, say, when you go swimming. If you know that you are not a good swimmer, then when you go swimming, you should not jump into the 6 feet of water, nor should you stand in the line where the water slide leads you into 12 feet of water. Everyone deals with situations where they have to think logically and or think before they act. So another example that most teens and some adults may deal with is smoking. There are hundreds of warnings on televisions, radio, and in schools that tell you that smoking is bad, and it tells you all the dangers associated with using different drugs and alcohol. On every pack of tobacco, it warns you of everything that can happen to you if you choose to associate yourself with these different drugs and or alcohol, which also has warning labels on each bottle. Another example of using common sense and thinking logically in association with drugs and alcohol is if you witness someone get hurt or injured due to the use of drugs and alcohol. Common sense should tell you not to associate with either one, because you have seen firsthand how dangerous and damaging the two can be to your health and possibly to someone else's safety. Lastly, I will discuss the gender challenges associated with thinking logically and the use of common sense. So let's get started. The use of common sense and thinking logically can also be broken down into genders. For example, ladies, say everyone in your class or all of your friends are dyeing their hair, or maybe they're all getting piercings, and you decide to ask your parents. But if you're at a very young age and you're under 17 years of age, I'm sure your parents will not approve of you getting a piercing and or dyeing your hair. But the logical thing to do is to always ask before you decide to just go off and do it on your own. Common sense should tell you that your parents would not approve of it, especially if you know it's something they do not agree with. Also, sneaking out of the house. Maybe your parents tell you you can't go to this very popular party that everybody's going to. Common sense should tell you not to sneak out of the house, because something very bad could happen to you while you are out. You could be kidnapped, or anything dangerous could happen to you. You could get hurt really bad, and your parents would never know because you decided to sneak out of the house without your parents' knowledge. And for my fellas, you should always try to think logically before you get influenced by any of your friends. For example, skipping school, or maybe even getting a tattoo. All because your friends are doing it. Think logically about it. For example, I know you guys have some of your favorite rappers might have tattoos on their faces, or they might have tattoos all on their neck and their arms. If you think logically about that, that's not good for a future career choice, especially if you plan on being something really popular or famous, such as like a doctor or maybe a lawyer. I don't know too many people who will want a lawyer with a big dragon tattooed on their face. And also running away from home. Some people run away from home because they're not happy with where they live, or maybe they're not satisfied because their parents won't let them do what they want to do. But you all are teenagers. You have your whole life ahead of you to live. Try not to rush the growing up process. There's a lot to live for, and there's a lot to look forward to. So if I were you, I would take my time and remember to think logically before you decide to make any harsh decisions that could affect the rest of your life. And common sense always comes into play, because if you have common sense, you will always remember to think before you act on anything. Another important factor associated with thinking before you act is developing self-control. Self-control is defined as controlling oneself, particular one's emotions, or the expression in one's behavior, especially in difficult situations. So like I stated before, with my female ladies, if you are in a situation such as the piercing situation, it is important that you always think before you act. Control yourself. And as far as my fellas, the thought of maybe possibly skipping school, having self-control and knowing that you should not do that. Bullying is another example that you can go on to think about. If you are upset and maybe you are the person being bullied, yes, it is not nice to be bullied, and now it is not right for anyone to ever be bullied, but it's good to have self-control over yourself, because to physically put your hands on anyone is always wrong in any situation. It is always best to think before you physically act on any situation. In conclusion, I would just like to review over everything that we talked about in today's Smart Moves conversation. First, remember to protect yourself during this pandemic of the coronavirus. Secondly, remember to always think before you make any harsh decisions that could possibly affect the rest of your life, such as getting a tattoo on your face. I don't think that's a good idea. 3, common sense should be used daily. Try to make sure you always think before you do certain things, and let your common sense kick in. That common sense is more than likely that little voice that speaks in the back of your head when you're not exactly sure what you should do or what you shouldn't do. That little voice in the back of your head that's telling you right from wrong, most of the time is your common sense. Remember, everyone struggles with knowing when to do the right thing at some point in their lives, which also relates back to the knowing of common sense and using it daily. And lastly, developing self-control can help keep you safe and healthy. Because if you have good self-control, it will prevent you from being angry all the time and getting easily upset at the smallest things. That is a good way to keep yourself healthy, and that is a good way to keep yourself ready and prepared to live a long, healthy lifestyle. Thank you all so much for being a part of my video in this Smart Moves activity. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave a comment below, and I'll be sure to get back at you.